like a spider in its web. Do not let it be supposed that this question of escape had been absent from our minds. On the contrary, we had even thought of trying to drag the canoe in which we crossed to and from the island of the Flower through the forest. The idea was abandoned, however, because we found that being hollowed from a single log with a bottom 4 or 5 inches thick, it was impossible for us to carry it so much as 50 yards. What then could we do without a boat? Swimming seemed to be out of the question because of the crocodiles. Also, on inquiry, I discovered that of the whole party Stephen and I alone could swim. Further, there was no wood of which to make a raft. I called to Hans, and leaving the rest in the graveyard, where we knew that they were safe, we went down to the edge of the water to study the situation, being careful to keep ourselves hidden behind the reeds and bushes of the mangrove tribe with which it was fringed. Not that there was much fear of our being seen, for the day, which had been very hot, was closing in, and a great storm, heralded by black and bellying clouds, was gathering fast, conditions which must render us practically invisible at a distance. We looked at the dark, slimy water, also at the crocodiles, which sat upon its edge in dozens, waiting, eternally waiting. For what, I wondered? We looked at the sheer opposing cliff, but save where a black hole marked the cave mouth, far as the eye could see, the water came up against it, as that of a moat does against the wall of a castle. Obviously, therefore, the only line of escape ran through this cave, for, as I have explained, the channel by which I presume Babemba reached the open lake was now impracticable. Lastly, we searched to see if there was any fallen log upon which we could possibly propel ourselves to the other side, and found nothing that could be made to serve. No, nor, as I have said, any dry reeds or brushwood out of which we might fashion a raft. "Unless we can get a boat, here we must stay," I remarked to Hans, who was seated with me behind a screen of rushes at the water's edge. He made no answer, and as I thought, in a sort of subconscious way, I engaged myself in watching a certain tragedy of the insect world. Between two stout reeds a forest spider of the very largest sort had spun a web as big as any lady's open parasol. There, in the midst of this web, of which the bottom strands almost touched the water, sat the spider waiting for its prey, as the crocodiles were waiting on the banks, as the great ape had waited for the Kalubis, as death waits for life, as the Motombo was waiting for God knows what. It rather resembled the Motombo in his cave, did that huge black spider with just a little patch of white upon its head, or so I thought fancifully enough. Then came the tragedy. A great white moth of the hawk species began to dart to and fro between the reeds, and presently struck the web on its lower side some 3 inches above the water. Like a flash that spider was upon it. It embraced the victim with its long legs to still its tremendous battlings. Next, descending below, it began to make the body fast, when something happened. From the still surface of the water beneath poked up the mouth of a very large fish, which quite quietly closed upon the spider and sank again into the depths, taking with it a portion of the web and thereby setting the big moth free. With a struggle it loosed itself, fell on to a piece of wood and floated away, apparently little the worse for its encounter. "Did you see that, Baas?" said Hans, pointing to the broken and empty web. "While you were thinking I was praying to our reverend father the Predikant, who taught me how to do it, and he has sent us a sign from the Place of Fire." Even then I could not help laughing to myself as I pictured what my dear father's face would be like if he were able to hear his convert's remarks. An analysis of Hans' religious views would be really interesting, and I only regret that I never made one. But sticking to business, I merely asked, "What sign?" "Baas, this sign. That web is the Motombo's cave. The big spider is the Motombo. The white moth is us, Baas, who are caught in the web and going to be eaten." "Very pretty, Hans," I said, "but what is the fish that came up and swallowed the spider, so that the moth fell on the wood and floated away?" "Baas, you are the fish, who come up softly, softly out of the water in the dark, and shoot the Motombo with a little rifle, and then the rest of us who are the moth fall into the canoe and float away. There is a storm about to break, Baas, and who will see you swim the stream in the storm and the night?" "The crocodiles?" I suggested. "Baas, I don't see a crocodile eat the fish. I think the fish is laughing down there with the big fat spider in its stomach." Also, when there is a storm, crocodiles go to bed because they are afraid lest the lightning should kill them for their sins." Now I remembered that I had often heard, and indeed to some extent noted, that these great reptiles do vanish in disturbed weather, probably because their food hides away. However that may be, in an instant I made up my mind. As soon as it was quite dark I would swim the water, holding the little rifle Intombi above my head, and try to steal the canoe. If the old wizard was watching, which I hoped might not be the case, well, I must deal with him as best I could. I knew the desperate nature of the expedient, but there was no other way. If we could not get a boat we must remain in that foodless forest until we starved, or if we returned to the island of the Flower, there ere long we should certainly be attacked and destroyed by Komba and the Pongos when they came to look for our bodies. "I'll try it, Hans," I said. "Yes, Baas, I thought you would. I'd come too, only I can't swim, and when I was drowning I might make a noise, because one forgets oneself then, Baas. But it will be all right, for if it were otherwise I am sure that your reverend father would have shown us so in the sign. The moth floated off quite comfortably on the wood, and just now I saw it spread its wings and fly away. And the fish, ah, how he laughs with that fat old spider in his stomach." End of chapter 17.